comeback. Ahmad Hardy, hard to beat, and he is off to the races. Hardy with the cutback. Touchdown, Ahmad Hardy.
Saying. Winds up.
Lacey up the middle. He won. Lacey's in the clear. It's a foot race. The Hurricanes cannot run him down. A lightning strike for Ole Miss. Tony has space. Malachi Tony still running. Touchdown Miami. Electric with the ball in his hands.
This is the CFF site's first show of the 2026 college football season. And look, the season hasn't started yet. Mike, we're back looking to shake off the rust, come out of the dungeon. We're done with the preseason fantasy draft guide. We're done with the preseason projections. But you know as well as I, man, it does not stop now. This is where we do a lot of work throughout the summer. We've got a lot of shows coming. We're going to be updating the preseason fantasy draft guide, the projections as we get closer to preseason camp. But let me just remind everybody while we're on real quick, the preseason fantasy draft guide now in its 13th season is up on the site. Over 120 pages of content, player projections, team profiles. Mike does a really good job of doing team outlooks for the upcoming season. We talk about top income and talent for each team. We have 5-year averages for offensive systems in there, player projections. We've got cheat sheets. We've even expanded this year. Mike, we've put your rankings up on the page as well, so that people can really take a deep dive into your rankings, and they have my cheat sheet as well. We've got the sleepers, players we're looking, the overvalued players, the freshmen, the dynasty pages, all of the stuff all the things that people are used to in the college fantasy football preseason draft guide is there. And again, throughout the season, all of your DFS content, weekly content is going to be up on the site for all those Heisman members that come in, and for anybody getting the All-American tier. That is all things college fantasy football. There's so much going on in the college fantasy football world right now. Of course, you've got Fantrax, which has been Old Faithful for us. You've got your full FBS leagues. You can customize there. We're using Fantrax once again. They're just a staple in the college fantasy football business. But of course, you've got Underdog Fantasy in there with their best ball competitions. You've got Yahoo now joining the space. You've got Blue Chip. It feels like we're getting a little bit more momentum in the college fantasy football space when it comes to platforms. And so we'll see if that brings some new people in. But again, we're back. And the one thing that we want to just say as we kick off this, thank you to each and every supporter of the college fantasy football site. You guys are so loyal. You come back year after year after year. And on behalf of Mike and myself, just a heartfelt thank you for supporting the college fantasy football site, making it what it is today. And it allows Mike and I to just pursue our passions, and that is college fantasy football. Mike, what am I leaving off the table? What am I leaving off the table before we get into talking about actual players now?
Yeah. I don't know if you were on Twitter yesterday, but I think that was the most filled day of college fantasy football talk that I've ever seen on social media. It was buzzing. Of course, we have Eric Froton, our good friend, now officially over at Yahoo, to thank for that. Just big day for the community as a whole. It was just a lot of fun seeing everybody's reaction to that. And like you said, hopefully, I don't know if it's going to be a huge boom of new subscribers, new college fantasy players, but a steady incline in that's in our space that we love so much would be a positive momentum heading into the future.
And look, not to bring, not to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but we've seen platforms come and go in this industry over the last 15 years. You've had CBS Sportsline was in at one time. Yahoo came in once before, went out, and now they're back in, right? And so we've had the days of U Sports. And so we've had multiple platforms in this space. And so I've always said the more the merrier. And you know what? Yahoo back in, Blue Chip in. You've got Underdog Fantasy. We've got some momentum going in the college fantasy football space, and of course that's where we come in because it is tough, right? Like player movement in college football nowadays, you've got free agency every year, and that's what makes it tough. And that's the one thing that we do is we just remember who we are, we remember our roots, and that's why we started the college fantasy football site. It's just to provide a resource to people to keep track of those moving parts and give them an edge in their college fantasy football season. So Mike, with that being said, I think we've got all the pleasantries out of the way. Let's get into, we're going to discuss quarterbacks on this show. And, you know, we're not going to go into, you know, you and I talked about before the show, we're not going to talk about our top 20, top 30 quarterbacks, right? I mean, we don't want to just kind of echo what we have listed in the preseason fantasy draft guide, but we do want to focus on a few guys here or there, different tiers. But before we do that, let's just kind of talk strategy. Sometimes guys have a strategy for drafts when it comes to quarterbacks. Sometimes the strategy may change year to year based on what we've seen in the offseason with some of our industry buddies as well. What are your thoughts on a strategy this year for quarterbacks, Mike?
Yeah, you're kind of forced into not necessarily punting quarterbacks, but most people are forced into taking quarterbacks maybe later on than they're normally used to taking because of the uprising of people drafting running backs to start most full FBS drafts. You're seeing 20 to 25 running backs go in the first 2 to 3 rounds in most drafts that we've completed this offseason. So you don't necessarily get a chance to draft an Arch Manning or a Trinidad Chambliss in rounds 2 and 3 because if you miss the boat on a running back in those first couple rounds, you're going to be left by the wayside and you're going to be in the scrap bin trying to look for running backs. So I guess general strategy for me, I'm comfortable with taking Brad Jackson in the first round. Even bypassing the running back in that first round, even though most people are taking them in that round. But I'm comfortable taking Brad Jackson in the first round. And then if you don't land him, I'm probably waiting until rounds 4 and 5 to where I start to think about a quarterback because you need to land those running backs early and often.
Yeah, I'm with you. The drafts that I've been in and together, we were in some of those drafts together. Running backs just shot off the board. I mean, shotgun approach, running back after running back after running back to the point where I was just, man, that some of the top 10 quarterbacks was still around in round 3, right? And so there's good value there. But again, everyone's league is different, right? It's the great thing about college fantasy football too. Sometimes it depends on the format of your league. It depends on the point system of your league. The one thing that I look at when it comes to strategy around quarterbacks for me is I kind of secondary the quarterbacks or almost tertiary because, and this is something you and I spoke about, in full FBS this year, you and I are pretty much in agreement that there's a big 4 when it comes to receivers, right? You've got Jeremiah Smith, Malachi Toney from Ohio State, Miami. You've got Bo Sparks, Easton Messer from Texas State and FAU. Those are probably our big 4 to the point where you and I have no problem taking one of those guys in the first 2 rounds if they're available. But then after that, we'll put wide receiver on the back burner. So I think that's really important too. The availability of those 4 along with those top, and I hate to say top tier running backs because the way that it's going right now, it's almost like the top tier, 2-tier running backs are going first before the quarterbacks start coming off the board. But I'm with you, Brad Jackson for Texas State. I like him. There's a lot of quarterbacks I like there in the 10 to 12 range, but it just feels like you can get those guys in round 3 and round 4 right now. So yeah, I don't think quarterback, unless you play, and here's another factor too. If you play in a 2 quarterback league, all of a sudden now sometimes quarterbacks can become a little bit more important earlier on in the draft. So it does depend on the format, but to your point, most traditional leagues that we've played on, the running backs are flying off the board early.
Yep. And it's not in totally different from years past, but it is very noticeable this year versus years past how the running backs are just flying off the board. So if this is your first draft, or if you're heading into your first draft this year and haven't looked at any mocks that are out there, just be prepared for that when entering that draft.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into this when we get into quarterbacks. I think this has a little bit to do with it as well, Mike, is that when you look at the top dozen or so running backs, these are guys that are returning, guys that have proven like those. That's why I think people are jumping on those running backs early. And so when you get to the quarterbacks, we have some of that too, but we don't have those elite level players coming back. But we do have Brad Jackson at the top. We've got Arch Manning sitting there too, right? And then you and I are kind of, we could flip Devin Dampier, Trinidad Chambliss, but we're pretty rock solid with our top four. But when it comes to drafting, let's just say we're inside the top 10 rounds. Let's look at let's take a couple of quarterbacks each. We'll both pick out guys that we like. I'll go ahead and give you the floor first, and then maybe guys that we're shining away from early that we see others jumping on. So let's kind of tee that up. Let's throw out our first name. Who's that guy in the first few rounds, Mike, that you're really liking right now?
Yeah, it's a little bit risky, and we posted our top 10 quarterbacks on Twitter X, and we got a comment that said, your rankings look pretty good, but you guys are way, in all caps, way too high on Kamario Taylor. So I did kind of want to spotlight him, here, just because there are some detractors still in the space, and I think the reason for that is because of the limited sample size, right? We talked about these running backs flying off the board because there's a lot of proven backs in that top end. But with Taylor, we have just a few game sample size, but that sample size looked pretty good, right? 170 rushing yards against Ole Miss, scored 37 fantasy points in that Egg Bowl. Looked decent in the bowl game against Wake Forest. Obviously got injured at that point, but we're going to say this over and over again over the course of the offseason, the system under Jeff Lebby, that's what we're looking for. He's produced multiple top 5 fantasy quarterbacks over the years, and Taylor fits the bill as one of those dual threats in a profitable fantasy system. So that's why I'm willing to put him in the top 10 right now. There's question marks, right? Limited sample size. The Mississippi State offensive line was atrocious last year. I think they were 130th in sacks allowed. That obviously needs to get shored up. But just the upside with Taylor is astronomical. Honestly, it's QB1 overall upside with him in college fantasy. I will put in a note here, and this happened today. I did get a call from the most famous person in college fantasy right now, Mr. Eric Froton. And we were talking about all the events yesterday, and then he was like, I got a player to bring up. I've been looking at quarterbacks, and he's like, Kamario Taylor. And I was like, all right, what's going on with Kamario Taylor? And he's like, he mentioned the phrase solo threat when describing Kamario Taylor, which we don't like to hear. Solo threat obviously being a run-only quarterback and one that is struggles maybe as a passer. So I did not like hearing those notes from Mr. Froton about Kamario Taylor, but he's been wrong before with that description with some quarterbacks in the past. So there is some risk, obviously, to wrap it up with Kamario Taylor, but the upside is it's QB1 overall.
Yeah, look, I love Kamario Taylor. I'm with you. I mean, there's a reason why we're kind of together with the ranking. I think the only thing that could be a pitfall is as we get later into the season, maybe some of the SEC schedule, the way that stacks up. But if we're taking the sample size that we got last year, I really like the potential in that offense. And he's got a couple of weapons to throw the ball to. And remember, one of the running backs that left last year, we've got one Fluff Bothwell returns, right? But Taylor's going to vulture some of those rushing touchdowns on the ground, and that offense is going to be, they're going to score enough points that I think Kamario Taylor is going to be a consistent, at least consistent fantasy threat week in and week out. You know, the name for me, Mike, and the reason I have a name on here too, and I didn't share this list because I was making it with you, making it up before we hit record here, is Sam Levitt. I'm a little higher on Sam Levitt than you are. And here's why I'm on Sam Levitt. It was quiet in the spring, right? We know Lane Kiffin goes into LSU. One of the discussions that we've had all offseason is how stacked LSU is at receiver and just how uncertain we are about them at running back right now. We've got Harlem Berry pegged in at running back one. You've had Dylan Jones come in from Wisconsin to open some eyes there in camp. You've got Caden Durham back. There's a real deep squad there, but we don't exactly have yet anything that we could put stock in like a Kewin Lacey that we do at Ole Miss, that he had when he was at Ole Miss, right? We know Sam Levitt has some dual threat ability. We also, and here's the risk, we know that Sam Levitt is coming off of an injury as well. But things were quiet in the spring because he was resting. And I just wonder if the hype train would have had a little bit more steam had he participated in the spring. And as we get a little bit closer to the season and as preseason camp progresses, the one thing that I feel quite confident about is that Lane Kiffin is going to find a way to get that offense going. Now, whether or not LSU is a college football playoff team, that's a different question. That's not for us to discuss. Matter of fact, the worse the defense is, the better we are from a college fantasy standpoint. But given the receivers that LSU has brought in, given the uncertainty of a workhorse back, in combination with Sam Levitt's ability to throw and run the ball under Lane Kiffin, I love the upside potential in that LSU offense. And so I might be a little bit heavier on Sam Levitt, but it's college fantasy football. I like drafting for the upside. And I think in that offense, under Lane Kiffin, we know he's going to get that offense going. Sam Levitt, for me, is one of those guys in the early rounds where right now I don't have a problem taking him because I just have a feeling that when the preseason camp starts and he's healthy and he's slinging it around, we're going to start hearing that hype train a little bit, get a little bit louder.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was all the injury, right? He's coming back from Liz Frank injury, I believe. So obviously he was very limited in the spring, and I think that's why maybe you've seen his ADP fall just a little bit, more so in the spring versus the summer. But it's a proven system. Lane Kiffin, that's 4 top 10 quarterbacks and overall in college fantasy in the last 6 years, and all 6 quarterbacks finished inside the top 30 in those 6 seasons. So it's just you're getting a high ceiling and a high floor with a Lane Kiffin quarterback.
Where are we going next, Mike? Who's another guy, really early rounds that you're looking at right now for
Yeah.
value?
Yeah, I spotlighted Nick Minicucci from Delaware, partially because I didn't see him in your top 10. He's my QB 10 this year. And what I really liked about Nick Minicucci last year was his versatility, right? We obviously want a fantasy quarterbacks that can both run and throw, and
Yep.
he did both last year, right? Finishes QB 12 in total fantasy points. He had 7 games of 30 fantasy points or more last season. And what I really liked is just he could do it both ways, right? You shut him down on the ground. He threw for 276 yards and 4 touchdowns against Middle Tennessee. You take away the pass, he had 55 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns in a performance against Western Kentucky. So he is a true dual threat that showed he can do it in multiple ways. He was very consistent, like I said, scoring 30 fantasy points 7 times. And, he gets back, he loses his top receiver, but he also gets back Sean Wilson, who should be a viable wide receiver 1 candidate. So I really I like Minicucci this year. I think he'll be a very consistent performer both in redraft and best ball. And you kind of look at the schedule; they're going to compete for a conference title potentially. They do get Vandy and Vanderbilt in the non-con, but then if you look at the remaining 10 games, none of those defenses rank inside the top 90. So
Yeah.
I like the schedule there for Delaware. And yeah, I really like Minicucci this year.
Have him at 11. So we're
Yeah,
splitting hairs,
there you
right?
go.
So, I
Yep.
mean, we're right there. Really like the guy too. And look, where I'll go next, and look, I couldn't agree more. Sometimes when we get to those G6 conference players, it's something we really focused on last year. We're going to echo it again this year. You've got to look at the schedule, particularly early on in the season, too, because some of those G6 players, they may hit a roadblock in that schedule in 2 of their first 4 weeks, 3 of the first 4 weeks. And that's what you have to really be cautious of. You don't want to be sitting there 4 weeks into the season and all of a sudden one of your early picks have kind of put you in a hole, right? So you really do have to look at the schedule, which we did with Manicucci, which is why we have him in and around our top 10. One guy for me, and maybe this is a little bit of just a love fest here, but I've just enjoyed watching this guy play. And last year, he was hurt for most of the season. We're talking about top 10 rounds. So this isn't a guy I'm reaching out early, but a guy that I really like. And it's Kevin Jennings for SMU. Last year, I mean, he's had 2 really good years. And last year he was playing with a bad wheel for almost most of the season. Didn't give you the rushing yards that we were really expecting at the beginning of the season, but hats off to him. The guy played hurt for a lot of the year, stuck it out, and still had a pretty decent year. His rushing touchdowns were there, but he didn't really give you the yards on the ground. If he's healthy this year, I really like that offense. They find a way to turn guys into weapons. I just love Jennings' dual threat ability. He's not the runner that a Kamario Taylor will be, right? But he does enough with his legs to extend plays, and he can do enough when the game's on the line to give you those rushing yards. And if we can get him, if he stays healthy and can kind of get back into that 300 to 500 yard rushing range total for the year, 6 to 8 rushing touchdowns, I really feel good about the passing offense for SMU now going into his third year as the starter. I do think SMU can kind of get back to where they were 2 years ago and be a little bit of a surprise in the ACC. Remember, we've got Miami right now, but other than Miami, I don't think anyone's really playing a lot of defense in the ACC. We talked about it last year. ACC was wide open. I think ACC will be wide open again this year. And I do think a healthy Kevin Jennings is a guy that I can target in the later early rounds. In other words, the 6 through 10 rounds, where he's still going to be there, and I think has tremendous value in that offensive system.
Yeah, if you want to talk about strategy, I think I really like Kevin Jennings as a redraft quarterback versus a best ball
Best
quarterback,
ball.
because
Yeah.
you are not going to get, he can move, right? But you're not going to get 40 and
100
50.
yards a game. You're not going to
Yeah.
get that. No.
No. So, but you look back, even on a bum wheel, he scored 20 or more fantasy points 9 out of 12 games last year. You're going to get the consistency from Kevin Jennings. And I don't have 2024 numbers up, but I'm pretty sure he was that consistent as a fantasy quarterback the year prior to. So I really like him as just one of your top 2 quarterbacks in a redraft format, because you
Yep.
know what you're getting every single year with him.
Yep. Now, here's the thing, though. We're in there. We're looking top 10 rounds. There's always a quarterback or two. They're on the board and they're like, we've got him ranked pretty. The projections say that he probably, if he's penciled in for 12 games, going to have a good year. A little bit of risk. Maybe it's a change of scenery. Maybe it's a guy that's injury prone. Who's the guy that you're shying away from early on in some of these drafts?
Well, I listed this guy because you have him as QB 8. I have him as QB 16. So you're a bit higher than I am on Byron Brown. He's been discussed a lot in this offseason, right? So I'm not going to belabor the point here. It's a big leap, right, from the American going to the SEC. Good news is he's playing in the same system. They basically brought over every single USF wide receiver to Auburn. So he's going to have familiarity with the guys that he's throwing to. But man, we got the first look in the spring game and it was not pretty, right? He threw multiple interceptions, completed what, 7 of 14 passes, I believe. So we know we're going to get a rushing floor if he plays all 12 games. Because when he has played all 12 games, he's had 175 rushing attempts in both seasons, right? Finished as the QB top 5 fantasy quarterback. So we know there's that potential, but I'm baking in the fact that his skill set does not translate to the SEC. He'll have some spike weeks. I think he is. So where we talked about Kevin Jennings, right? You're going to get consistency. I'm fine drafting Byron Brown in a best ball format, but I would steer clear in a redraft. I don't know when he's going to have some spike weeks, but I think it's just going to it's going to be very hit or miss with him.
Yeah, look, 2 years ago, Byron Brown, Caden Salter, our top 2 quarterbacks. Remember that? Then Byron Brown got hurt, came back last year and just absolutely crushed it. Alex Golish goes to Auburn, practically brings all of the skill players from South Florida with him. To your point, man, I saw Byron Brown standing next to Cam Newton, and I was like, man, he's a unit, man. So I think he'll hold up in the SEC. To your point, there were some concerns about whether or not he could throw the ball. He's elevating, the competition's elevating, but I believe in Alex Golish. I love the system. I think if Byron Brown plays within that system, I think to your point though, best ball format, probably better. Traditional format, he'll probably be a spot starter if you're a single quarterback league. If you're 2, you're probably going to be okay. Again, hard for me to keep him out of the top 10 just because of the upside, the system, the potential, right? And so, when I look at that, one of the guys I think about, Mike, is John Mateer from Oklahoma. And remember, this was a guy last year that came over from Washington State and then came into Oklahoma last year. And I want to say you and I probably had him in the top 10. I don't remember, but I know he was up there.
Top 5 again, maybe for me.
Yeah, and maybe so for me too. And I don't recall, but another guy that kind of got dinged up a little bit. Never was really the same after he got injured. Oklahoma feels like they have the receivers there. They got Centania coming back. But man, to your point, to go from Washington State to Oklahoma, there was a noticeable difference in his play, albeit he was a little bit dinged up last year. Still makes me nervous to have him right around the 12, 13 spot. That's a guy for me. Last year just kind of stung a little bit. I can't get past that. And he's one of those guys that feels like he was on the board a few times for me in drafts, and I'm just not there to take him.
Who's that, Mateer or Brown? Which one?
John Mateer.
John Mateer. Yeah, it's just that's one I've kind of let go by. I think I'm feeling like you, right? I was a little bit hurt over his performance last year because I had a lot of shares of him, playing under Ben Arbuckle. I believe this is his 4th year now playing under Ben Arbuckle. So, he knows the system. I do think the wide receiver room is vastly improved. Bring back Isaiah Satania. You get Trell Harris from Virginia. Yep. You get Parker Livingston from Texas. Yep. So that is a much improved room. But yeah, it's just a guy that, I don't know. You're just hurt over last year's performance.
Yeah, but also to one of the points we're making too, traditional format, maybe a little bit more iffy, best ball. You're probably going to get 3-4 really good, really high games from him because he's good. He's the guy that will give you that rushing threat. He'll give you that 75 yards and possibly 2 touchdowns on the ground in any particular week, right? Just worry about some of the consistency. But again, like last year burned me a little bit. And so it's a guy that I've just shied away off in some of the early rounds. Now, as we get into some of those mid-tier guys, look, there's a slew of names that we could throw out, right? Let's just kind of highlight a couple for folks of guys that we love, not necessarily love, because we'll get into that. We'll get into players that we're buying, players that we're selling. That's for another show. Who's a couple of guys in those middle rounds, Mike, where on the board you've kind of, hey, I may have to take this guy right here, or you've given a lot of thought to taking?
Yeah, Cameron Brown from Georgia State was getting him beyond round 20 early in the season or off season, but he's in that middle tier range between rounds, 13 to 17 where you're going to have to take him at this point. Um, I really like what I saw in the limited viewing last year. He started three full games. And in those performances, he scored 25 fantasy points. He scored 30 plus fantasy points, and then he had a 40-point fantasy performance. So, some have deemed him like more of just a running quarterback, a solo threat versus, a complete dual threat. But if you look at some of his passing numbers, 65% completion rate last year. He had 13 touchdowns to 1 interception last year. So, this is a guy I believe is going to be the centerpiece of that Georgia State offense, and a true dual threat. That somebody who's going to provide 40-point, fantasy upside on a weekly basis because of his running and passing ability. The big question with Cameron Brown is obviously, is Georgia State going to be competitive enough to where that he can do this on a weekly basis, right? They were 1-11 last year. Georgia State was. Head coach Del McGee is probably the coach in all of college football with the hottest seat entering this year. And then you lose, obviously, Ted Hurst and Javon Robinson from the wide receiver room. That's over 200 vacated targets. So there are some question marks. That's why he's going in the middle to late rounds of your fantasy drafts. But he's got that upside with his legs and arm.
Yeah, I like Cameron Brown too. When you look at the combined totals for the quarterbacks that played last year, and if you put those together, you've got a solid season right there. And if we could bring that together with him as just the rock solid quarterback 12 games throughout the year, I think you've got some good value with where he's at. I mean, that's a guy, I mean, we're probably being a little generous. I mean, we're talking maybe rounds 11 to 20. And quite frankly, you could probably get him even closer to 20 right now, I would think, right?
It depends on who you're drafting with at this point. Yeah, some guys are higher on him than others.
Yeah, and that's where I kind of landed on a couple of guys because I feel like I could have gone a bunch of different ways right here. But if you're going down with Cameron Brown, who is around, where we have him, which what we have him probably somewhere in the 30 to 40 range. I think for me, for somebody that kind of falls in that range, is Mason Heinzel of Pitt. And the reason why I really like him, and we think about Pitt's offense last year, they started really well, and then they kind of puttered out as the season wore on. I really love, and we know Desmond Reed's gone, right? So we have Turner that's going to be the back there, Jacarian Turner. But I really love the first 4 games, the first 4 to 5 games of that Pitt schedule. I think it really shapes up nicely that if you cannot get one of those top 10, 12 quarterbacks that are on our list, and you're kind of punting quarterback for the first 8 to 10 rounds, as well as I, the waiver wire wins college fantasy football. But man, for the first 4 weeks, I just feel like he's a guy that if you're playing in a 2 quarterback league, can hold serve at that quarterback 2 spot for the first 4 to 5 weeks. And they've got some talent at receiver. I mean, look, there's no stars there, but there's 2 or 3 guys that can play. Turner's probably going to be a weapon out of the backfield. They got, some tight end options there as well. I just feel that that's a guy that can be a solid quarterback 2 for you somewhere in the rounds that we're talking about, where you were talking about taking Cameron Brown.
Yeah, I mean, you said in the first 4 weeks, but if you so Miami of Ohio, UCF, Syracuse, and Bucknell in the first 4 weeks, you could extend that to 7 weeks. They play at Virginia Tech, they play Virginia Tech, who's got a new coaching staff. North Carolina, who was obviously not any good last year. Boston College, again, another opponent, not any good last year. And then you face a top 10 defense in Miami, right?
Yep.
So you can extend that to 7 weeks. So the schedule really benefits Heinzel. If you look beyond that, after that Miami matchup, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Louisville, California. Nobody scares you on that
No,
schedule.
no, and
Not one.
it brings us back to the point of the ACC again, right? Like, there's nobody in the ACC besides Miami that I think anyone's scared to play right now, and depending on the schedule, it just sets up nicely for offensive points, and that's I think what we're looking for. He's going to be is under center for the second year now. He's coming off a year of experience. I just think he's great value with where you can get him in a draft right now. Um, where are you going next? Maybe another name in that area, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss Gunnar Stockton for Georgia. We covered off on QB strategies earlier. He Gunnar Stockton is like the antithesis to Kevin Jennings, right? You are not going to consistently get 25 to 30 fantasy points every single week. And the other issue with Stockton and then Georgia in general, you have no idea when these guys are going to score their fantasy points. You just don't. And I don't know if that's by design. I'd have to, talk to somebody that knows Georgia better than I do, but it's a complete guessing game to when these guys are scoring points. So I have a fast rule of I don't draft any Georgia players in a redraft format. You are going to be lucky to be able to guess on when they're going to score, 25 to 30 fantasy points in a given week. If you look, so Gunnar Stockton scored he scored 30 fantasy points 6 times last year, right? His 3 lowest outputs last year were against Georgia Tech, Austin Peay, and Charlotte, the 3 worst defenses
Right.
on the schedule, right? Look, maybe that's the trend, right? You do not start a Gunnar Stockton against the terrible teams that they play on their schedule. Maybe that is the trend with Georgia players, right? They'll spread it around in their 50 to nothing blowouts. But I do like Gunnar Stockton for best ball formats, right? He is going to score. He's going to have his spike weeks, right? Score 30 fantasy points or more multiple times. And he's a running quarterback, right? I believe he had double-digit rushing touchdowns last year.
Yeah.
I should be expected to do that again this year, right? In the second year as the starter. So I think he is the perfect middle round, QB2, QB3, best ball format quarterback. But redraft, I can't do it. I don't know when to predict when he's going to score, 25 fantasy points.
Yeah, look, couldn't wait to get to this one because this is a guy I told you that I'm just high on. I can't say super high, but I know I'm higher than most because all the early drafts that you were doing, you were like, man, you can get this guy whenever you want. And so we're talking like that 11 to 20 round and probably here in the second half of that. But there's something about Colton Joseph at Wisconsin that I really like. And look, I think the entire full FBS college fantasy football world, especially if you were in a keeper league, was disappointed when he left Old Dominion. But that's the day and age of college football right now. You're going to parlay that type of season with that type of talent into a Power Four grab of money and scholarship. And so he's at Wisconsin, and I'm not expecting him to put up anywhere near the numbers that he put up at Old Dominion. But, I know I mentioned this to you. They had gotten Abu Sama from Iowa State, right? And whether or not he heads the backfield or not remains to be seen. I happen to think that Colton Joseph is going to be Wisconsin's best runner. And if they find enough from him in the passing game and he stays healthy, I still feel that he's going to be a legitimate dual threat quarterback. He's not going to average the offense that he was averaging at Old Dominion, but I do think that he's going to be Wisconsin's best runner. And I think they'll get enough from him passing that I do think from week to week, he has potential to put up some good numbers because you never know when he's going to be able to break off a 50, 60, 70-yard run for a touchdown. And with that and look, I get it. He's playing in the Big Ten, but man, he did it against Indiana last year at the beginning of the year too, right? And you're talking about the national champs. So I don't think I know we talked about this and everyone talked about this. Be careful with the G6 players parlaying their success at the Power 4 level and how we're drafting him. And I think we've done well. We never put him in our top 10. We never put him in our top 20. And I don't even think you have him in your top 30. But
50.
Top 50. But I
Yeah.
have him around the 30 mark. And I just think with his potential in the system, there's value. And he has the athletic ability. He has the proven ability. And I don't think I don't think I'm putting an overvalue on him, but I love where I can get him if he has that upside. And to your point, I know where you might go with this. Might be one of those guys you want to target more so in a best ball than a traditional format because of the ability of him possibly giving you 100 yards and a touchdown on the ground. But it's just a guy that I like his talent, ability, and his fantasy upside, even though he's at Wisconsin.
Yeah, I do like Colton Joseph, but I would say not. I differ from you, not really in the rounds 11 to 20, probably beyond that. I think you can. I'm in a couple drafts right now. I think you can get him closer to the 23 to 25 round range. So I do like him better maybe in that area. What is working for Joseph, not only his obvious rushing abilities, but the schedule for Wisconsin is not strong, right? You are
Absolutely.
absolutely not playing Colton Joseph in week 1 against Notre Dame. I think anybody can obviously see
Correct.
that. But after that, you get a couple non-con,
30 point performance incoming now, Mike.
oh yeah, yeah,
Because
Notre
you
Dame.
said it.
Yeah,
But yeah, but you're right. You're not going to start him in the opener.
no,
I get it.
no. But then you get Western Illinois and Eastern Michigan. You can very reasonably start him in those games. Tough matchup against Penn State, but you're changing coaching staffs. But then it's really kind of not smooth sailing, but it's not daunting from there. Which you get Michigan State, UCLA. There's Rutgers, Maryland, Purdue mixed in there, and then to close at Minnesota.
Yeah,
so it's
there's
not a
good matchups
gauntlet
there.
by any stretch of the imagination. And what I do like, to be honest, too, with Wisconsin, they have to win this year. Like you cannot just run and play defense. Like they have to go this year. Luke Fickell's gone, so I just kind of like that. When looking at quarterbacks or just fantasy players in general, these teams that can't sulk away the games, like they are going to have to go
Yeah,
on
that
offense to
program's
save their
in
jobs.
the program's in desperation. This is a big year for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the schedule works in favor of Colton Joseph.
Anybody in that area, even though I hate to, at this particular point, right, to say that we're shying away from people, but anybody that you've noticed that like is going off in around this area that you just like can't get on board with?
Yeah, I hate to say it because it's from the team in my background, right? If we're on video, but it is Bryce Underwood with Michigan. I just look, we know the system that is being brought in with Jason Beck and Kyle Whittingham coming over. They know how to utilize a dual threat quarterback, which absolutely Bryce Underwood fits the bill, right? He's 228 pounds. He can run. If you're looking at the QB1 in this system under Jason Beck over the last 4 years, you're averaging 141 rushing attempts per season from the QB1. You absolutely want that from a fantasy quarterback. I just don't like the vibes coming out of like reports and from the summer and spring, obviously with Bryce Underwood. He did not show well in the spring game. That's obviously well documented with his accuracy issues. But I don't know if you saw this, Joe, but he's making comments this offseason that he is the best player to ever come out of the state of Michigan. Like that is just full 180 from what we wanted Bryce Underwood to do this offseason. We want you to put your head down and work, right? Work on your accuracy issues, get in the playbook, and you're out here making comments like that to the media. So
Did I just see that he will not be in the NCAA football game because they couldn't reach a settlement on what he wanted to get paid?
you might have. I don't play the game, so
I don't know if
I don't.
I don't know if that was a fake post or not, but I thought I saw
Yeah.
that he would not be playable in college football. Whether or not it was legit, I don't know, but it seems now I'm starting to think that it's real because of what you're telling me. So
Yeah,
who knows?
it could be. I don't like to hear that from a quarterback that has proven nothing to this point, right? So look, we know the system is great. We know it works for dual threat quarterbacks. Bryce Underwood could be a top 10 quarterback this year. He's obviously, got the physical abilities to do that, but I don't know, something about, these offseason, stories and quotes coming out of that camp. And I'll say this too, like, there's a very slim chance that Underwood gets replaced this year just because of the money that he's getting paid by boosters, but it's not 0% chance. And because Kyle Whittingham is not a spring chicken, he needs to win and win fast, right? They're filtering money in recruiting right now. They're just trying to build up this roster because they know that they got to win big in the next 5 years. And I don't know, something about Underwood that I'm very tentative to draft him, even as a Michigan fan.
Okay, well, I'll go G6. We'll kind of change it a little bit. And there's just a guy that I can't get on board with. And it's, the guy that started out at Oklahoma, went to Auburn, and now he's at UNLV, and it's Jackson Arnold. And I know it's just a difference in competition, and I know that he can move with his legs. Man, I just have watched this guy play over the last 2 years, and it just feels like he cannot play the quarterback position. And I know it's, I hate to say that it's a downgrade in competition, but man, there's just, and I don't even know who UNLV would have behind him, and he's probably going to have a good year. I mean, obviously Anthony Calandria did that going from Virginia to UNLV, and now parlaying that success to another opportunity at Nebraska. I P4 opportunity at Nebraska. I can't see Jackson. I can't envision Jackson Arnold being a starting quarterback for 12 games and not pissing me off at some point having him. I'm just I can't go there for as much as I want to, and I like that system, and for as much as I like Jaden Thomas at running back for UNLV, I'm not feeling Jackson Arnold as a quarterback at I'm just not touching Jackson Arnold at all, and I know there's potential there.
So I've gone back and forth with Jackson Arnold. I was very high on him earlier in the offseason because it's obviously a proven system. Dan Mullen, I think we can certifiably call him a quarterback guru at this point, right?
Yep.
He is a quarterback
Well.
guru. He is
Yeah.
producing top 10 fantasy quarterbacks year after year after year. We listened to our friends at the G5 Hive. We listened to their podcast with UNLV. Alex Orji is the quarterback behind Jackson Arnold, coming over last year from Michigan, right? Then got injured. Wasn't a factor after 2 or 3 games last year, right? If you look back at the week 1 game against Idaho State last year, UNLV, Alex Orji had 34 rushing yards and a touchdown, in addition to 3 passing attempts. So, like, he is going to be utilized if healthy. Whether it's just red zone packages or whether they, I don't think they'll use a 2 quarterback system, but they'll use him in some packages, right? So that's taking Jackson Arnold off the field. And you think like, oh, they played Idaho State, maybe it was garbage time that Alex Orji, got those 34 rushing yards and a touchdown. No, it was 38-31. Like, that was a competitive, close game last year, and you're still seeing Alex Orji get packages in high leverage situations in the red zone. So there is obviously top 10, top 5 potential, as with Jackson Arnold, as we saw last year with Anthony Calandria. But like you said, you'll probably be pissed at some point this season.
Well, I remember watching the UNLV opener. It was opener they played Idaho State, wasn't it?
Yep.
Orji fumbled at the half-yard line into the end zone. And after that, it seemed like Mullen was gun shy to put him in, which who could blame him, right? It becomes a trust issue. And I always wonder, I look back to last year, had he not done that, he probably would have gotten more touches in weeks 2, 3 moving forward. So,
well, he got injured. He did get injured.
Yeah, he got injured, right. But there was, he even had a fumble at the goal line that he didn't get credit for it. He probably should have had a touchdown in that opener. So I'm just saying Orji isn't also a presence as well. And I'm not sure there's enough consistency in Jackson Arnold that maybe both of those guys play. Who knows? I'm not sure.
I can see it. He's done it in the past. I think it was Anthony Richardson and Emory Jones, maybe back at Florida. Dan Mullen had that. So I can see both quarterbacks playing at some point.
So, Mike, before we get into some of the position battles, let's kind of be a little bit more like bullet point type. Who's some of the guys that you're targeting in the later rounds? Some of your sleepers, if you want to throw out a couple of them, two, three names. Guys that you're just targeting late in drafts, they're probably not going, or they're going in very late rounds of really deep full FBS or very deep best ball drafts that are going 25, 30 rounds.
Yeah, Malachi Singleton for Appalachian State. He transferred over from Purdue. Struggled as a passer at his previous stops. So he is moving down a level, so hopefully that does help. But this Appalachian State offense is expected to be more run based this year with Malachi Singleton as a starting quarterback. He's 235 pounds, known best as a runner. And why that's important, playing under head coach Dowell Loggins, is Loggins also had a quarterback who can run quite well 2 years ago when he was the offensive coordinator of South Carolina, and that was Lenore Sellers. That year, back in 2024, Lenore Sellers finished as QB 34. He had over 600 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns, and 166 rushing attempts, right? So it might be a struggle passing for Singleton. We'll see how he performs in the Sun Belt. But if you can get 166 rushing attempts from a quarterback that is going in rounds 23, 24, like you will take that every single day in college fantasy. So I really like Singleton as kind of a QB5, QB6 on your roster to kind of round out that rotation.
Yep. And you want to throw out a couple of other while you're at it? We'll just kind of run through these pretty quick.
Yeah. Kenny Minchey for Kentucky is somebody that I'm definitely interested in, and I think he's rising up boards. He was QB 66, in May and June. I think he's rising a few notches above that, but this isn't the Kentucky of old. Will Stein is the new offensive coordinator coming over from Oregon, and he has produced multiple top 10 quarterbacks over the last few years. He could become, he's 37 years old, so he's got a ways to go, as a play caller and head coach now, but he's entering that quarterback whisperer like aura. Just the way he's had, productive fantasy quarterbacks over the last 4 years. Last 3 years, each one of his quarterbacks have thrown for 30 touchdowns. Each of those quarterbacks have completed over 70% of their passes. So they're highly efficient, put up a ton of fantasy points. And people forget that Kenny Minchey was locked into a quarterback battle last year with CJ Carr. Yep. I don't think he was ever going to win it, but it was closer than it appeared, on the surface there. So, and Carr is the Heisman front runner, according to betting odds right now. So, I really like Kenny Minchey as like we said, with Singleton, kind of that QB5 to round out your rotation on your roster.
Yeah, I'll throw out two or three names real quick, and the reason I'll throw out three is just because I have them bunched together in the rankings. These guys are between 45 and 50 for me. I like Alonzo Barnett over at UCF, and the reason I like him is that you've got a player that's he has that dual threat ability. Remember, there were questions last year on whether he was going to be coming back, returning from injury. He did that, had a strong season at James Madison, which James Madison was the cream of the crop of the of the Sun Belt, right? So I think this is a guy that can really, that his game will translate to the next level playing in the Big 12. Of course, there's not too many tough defenses in the Big 12. You've got Texas Tech. You've probably got BYU, but outside of that, there's nothing really scary inside the Big 12. I do think, much like Colton Joseph at Old Dominion, Alonzo Barnett has the resume. I think his game will translate into the Big 12. I think he will be a decent, serviceable option in fantasy at some point, and we'll see him on some rosters. I think Michael Hawkins at West Virginia under Rich Rodriguez. I think him and Cam Cook have potential to be a very formidable 1-2 punch in Rich Rodriguez's offense. And whether we go best ball or redraft, I think there'll be some weeks where there might be some good matchups for him, maybe more so in a best ball where he may have some big weeks, where Cam Cook may have big weeks in other weeks. And then I think you look at DJ Lagway at Baylor, right? And he's playing under Jake Spavital now. And now we're going to see if he's going to fulfill his potential. Was it the system at Florida, or will we see that highly touted, recruited DJ Lagway come in at Texas State. At Baylor, and see in that Jake Spavital offense where they're going to sling it around quite a bit, how he can produce in there. And I think there's some upside there in that offense. So just three names. I have a bunch together, but Alonzo Barnett, Michael Hawkins, and DJ Lagway. I think those are going to be three guys that you can get in the later rounds that at some point are going to be on some fantasy rosters and starting this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's upside to all three of them, right? Michael Hawkins, Alonzo Barnett, obviously really good running quarterbacks. Hopefully don't get injured, which has been a common theme with Barnett, obviously coming off injury last year.
Yep.
And then, I don't know, Rich Rod quarterbacks always seem to get injured at one point or another. But
well, the running backs did last year, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, but yeah, Hawkins is a perfect fit for that system. I think they showed him. When Michael Hawkins was on his official visit when they were recruiting him to West Virginia, I think they showed him tape from high school playing in a similar system and just how good of a fit he is playing under Rich Rodriguez. So I am excited to see how Hawkins performs this year.
So look, we're going to get into some more quarterbacks as we get, we're going to do running backs, we'll do receivers, we'll combine tight ends, and then we'll kind of get into players that we're buying, players that we're selling as we get another couple of weeks into July as we get here towards the end of the month. So there's going to be some more names coming on the quarterback spots. But as we creep closer to preseason camp, and obviously these position battles do have an impact on our quarterback rankings, Mike, let's just kind of go over a few of the programs that we're going to be keeping eyes on as we get in the preseason camp. I think top of the list undoubtedly has to be Alabama, right? Where that's probably going to be the single most watched and, from us, from a quarterback perspective, fantasy perspective, who's going to emerge there. We have Keelan Russell. We believe it's him, strong spring, but still a long ways to go before we open up and kick off the season for Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, most people think it's Keelan Russell. Obviously threw 4 touchdowns, looked incredibly impressive in the spring game, but it's one of those, people are drafting him as if it's 100% locked in. Keelan Russell is the starter there, and it probably is the case, but there's a chance that Austin Mack could come out of there and be the starter this year. So yeah, that is the most anticipated quarterback battle.
For me, I feel like if it was rock solid, Keelan Russell would be a top 25, 20 quarterback for me, but it's not. That's why I have him closer to 30. We just don't have the rubber stamp yet.
Yeah, correct.
Right. Another program maybe we're looking at too, and you could probably add, put the little bit of why behind that is Memphis, right? So we're looking at the Memphis quarterback spot. You've got Charles. What's Charles?
Charles Huff.
What's that?
Huff.
Yeah, Charles Huff coming over from Southern Miss, coming over to Memphis now. What are we watching at the quarterback battle there at Memphis?
Yeah, it's very similar to Alabama, actually. Marcus Stokes, the West Georgia transfer, he is likely the starter coming out of the spring, but not a done deal, right? There's still Air Noland, who transferred over from South Carolina, who transferred over from Ohio State before that. So, we'll cover Stokes more in our sleepers episode in a couple weeks. But that's one where Memphis talked about all offseason that they want a running quarterback. In that system, new offensive coordinator Kevin Decker, who comes over from Old Dominion, who coached Colton Joseph last year. So we obviously know the potential of the quarterback one in that system. So that's another highly anticipated one that I'll be watching. Probably Marcus Stokes, but no rubber stamp just yet, as you said.
Let's go back to the power conferences, because I think the big one that a lot of people are going to be keeping eyes on is Tennessee, where you've got Faison Brandon and you've got George McIntyre, right? We know Josh Heupel's ability to produce some fantasy relevant quarterbacks seems far from settled there. I know you and I had talked about this. I believe Tennessee may have a tough matchup week 1. I'm not sure if you want to look that up real quick, but I know their second and third weeks. It feels like matchups where there's either a possibility that both guys could play or whoever is the starter may solidify themselves as the full-time starter throughout the year, because it feels like one of those schedules where both guys could play early on, or one guy whose name is starter is going to run away with it because the matchups aren't that great. You have it right there in front of you?
Yeah, they faced the mighty Furman in week 1, so not
Okay.
not a big matchup.
Okay.
Yeah,
So what's the beginning of that schedule look like for Tennessee?
Furman, Georgia Tech, and Kennesaw.
So there you go. So like Georgia Tech was the team in there that I remembered, like, okay, do we see both guys play in week 1? And then if they're rock solid on their starter in week 2 versus Georgia Tech and they play well, that week 3 matchup is just it's a tasty win, and then you're probably likely to see that guy locked in. But who knows what the SEC schedule will produce? So anything we have Brandon right now with the slight edge at QB1 right there. Any take on quarterback there at Tennessee? Because that one's going to be watched quite a bit too, just because it's a Power Four conference.
Yeah, I can just see a situation where you kind of hinted at it. If it is not fully decided by week 1, you're probably going to see both players play against Furman leading up to the Georgia Tech matchup, because you'll probably want to have a guy in place for that one. So I still like whoever comes out, and I think it is going to be Brandon. It's interesting too, just because, and I mentioned this on a previous podcast, how like it seemed it was deadlocked coming out of spring between McIntyre and Brandon, but there's been a lot of summer hype for Brandon in multiple articles, which they seem to be hinting that he is more like closer to the favorite versus a coin flip coming into fall camp. So that's why we listed Brandon as our starter in our rankings and projections. So, you're not drafting this guy more than your QB 5 or 6, right? But it's Tennessee, it's high profile, so we'll be following that over the course of the summer.
And just a bullet point and highlight a few other G6 position battles that we're looking at. We've got Missouri State right now. We've got Henry Beeline the fourth, I think, penciled in as a starter currently right now. We've got Colorado State, where Jim Moore went over to. We've got Hoss Haney, the transfer, who was started out I think at TCU, went over to Oklahoma State, had a good week 1 last year, got injured. He's got dual threat ability, so he'll be leading that. We believe that Colorado State offense. You've got Ohio, that right now we've got Nick Poulos, I think, is projected for us, but we know what that quarterback one can produce in the Bobcat system. And then also we kind of, we talked about right before the show as well, is throw in Western Kentucky on that list as well with, will it be Rodney Tisdale? He's got some dual threat ability if he's able to get that started job at Western Kentucky. But those are all a bunch of programs right now where we've got our eyes on preseason camp, see who emerges, because these are the guys that could be climbing up our draft boards as we get closer to Labor Day, or guys that we may be taking stabs on later on in drafts because they're not at the top of the list this year. Anything in particular that really jumps out, or you want to touch on any of those?
No, not really. It's just those are some top tier G6 situations that we really want to keep our eye on. Missouri State had a top 60 quarterback last year in Jacob Clark.
Yep.
So it'd be interesting. I really thought Skylar Locklear was going to be the guy for Missouri State. Could be, because he has the relationship with Mark Kalla, who both of them came over from UTEP. So it was a little surprising to see some of the preseason magazines list Henry Boleyn as the projected starter. And then Colorado State, just wanted to point out, like, Hoss Haney has top 10 quarterback potential, and he's being drafted in the top 10 rounds, but that one's far from settled. If you believe some of the coaching quotes, Jim Moore Jr. said he's may wait until week 1 to
and remember, that's a potential thing too, right? And this is something that we've talked about. We've become a little bit more cautious of. We don't want to over index on these guys that, one, we don't have a big enough sample. He's got the potential, yes. So do other handful of guys, but we don't have the big sample size on him to really put him up there to say this guy's worth a second, third, a fourth, a fifth round pick right now at this particular point. Because those first 5 or 6 rounds is really where you're building the foundation of your roster, right? So to your point, potential up there. There are some drafts where he's going. We're not over-indexing yet because we don't have that bigger sample size.
No, but if you have the kahunas to draft him early and he's the starter, again, top 10 potential. And if he doesn't hit, then you just cut him. So there's multiple ways to go about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else we didn't hit that we want to cover before we put a bow on this show, Mike? First show of the year. Feel really good. Never really stumped ourselves too much. Few smiles on our face. We're out of the dungeon. We've got the preseason guide. We'll be updating that stuff as we go. Try to knock out a bunch of shows over the next couple of weeks, because as we get into preseason camp, that's when things really don't slow down. Things come in all the time. This is like the period for us where we take advantage of it, try to enjoy ourselves, talk college fantasy football, do a bunch of shows so people can start preparing for their drafts. A lot of guys post July 4th, a lot of we just know with subscribers coming into the site, this is when draft season really ramps up. And then as we get into August, those first 3 weeks of August is really just the heat of college fantasy football draft season. So we'll have all of our shows done by then, and hopefully a lot of the material will be updated by then. Remember, we've got 2 deep depth charts in that in the preseason fantasy draft guide, so you do a good job of updating that as well. Anything we're missing before we put a bow on this thing and get out of here for our first show, man?
No, over the course of the summer, we continuously update the guide. We continuously update our projections, our rankings, our cheat sheets, our underdog fantasy rankings. All of that's updated right up until kickoff week 0. So make sure to subscribe. Make sure to look for updates because we're doing it up until kickoff.
And the one thing I forgot, the Discord. Man, the Discord.
How could you forget?
To mention the Discord this year, where hopefully we don't have any shenanigans go on. We keep the Discord. Great value there. Team channels, game day chat, even some smack talk from time to time that we have to cap off. But anyway, get in, get that All-American Heisman tier, get into Discord. That's where you want to be on game days. Guys throughout our college fantasy football community updating that stuff with all the news from around the country on game days to give you all of the edge you need on your lineups, whether you're playing DFS or traditional college fantasy football. But that's going to do it, Mike. That's our first show. Feels good to kind of shake the rust off. We talk quarterbacks coming up. We'll do running backs. We'll do receivers. We'll do some, sleepers. We'll do some players that we're buying, players that we're selling. Still a lot to do. Let's keep the microphones out, man. Keep the cameras on standby, but that's going to do it. So for our first show, for my partner, Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo, college fantasy football site. First show of the year. That's a wrap. We'll see you on the next show.